Job training, road funding, education. What will top the list of priorities in Michigan? A look at the governor's State of the State address and the president's State of the Union. The State of MiWeek starts right now.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. It's a pretty big week. It was the state of the fill in the blank. First, Governor Snyder gave the State of the State address, and then an hour later, the president gave his State of the Union. Interesting speeches for both, talking about opportunity. First up, State of the State. The governor wants to see more job training to close the skills gap. He's pushing for road funding, and he's talking education priorities. We will sort out what initiatives are going to get the most traction. Plus, the president gives the State of the Union. Will we see any agreement between the White House and Congress? And how does that impact us here in Michigan? It is all coming up for you on MiWeek. And we do start tonight with a look at the governor's address this week. There was a lot to it, and it will be interesting to find out how closely the governor's agenda aligns with the legislature's. Let's start with our MiWeek contributors. Nolan Finley, he's the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Stephen Henderson, he's the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. Big week, a lot of state of the. So what has been the general reaction? Nolan, I'll start with you with the governor's State of the State address. Now we've had 2 days to digest.
You know, I don't think it was the sort of speech that was going to generate a whole lot of reaction. These were very low-key, highly sort of complex technical proposals, and I think people are waiting to see what that idea actually looks like. I'm not sure there's a great deal of understanding when he talks about people instead of programs, what that means. You know, is he going to start, you know, we know he's going to consolidate a few departments. Everybody loves that, you know, less bureaucracy. But is he going to start blowing up programs and replacing them wholesale? Or, you know, what does it actually look like?
What was your overall impression, Stephen, in terms of also tone?
I mean, it was a very workmanlike speech, and one of the things I was taking note of was, you know, I mean, the governor doesn't like to write a speech and read it. He likes to sort of make notes in an outline and then sort of fill in the blanks. And I can remember the first couple times he did it, those were terrible speeches. They were sort of wandering, and he seemed unsure of himself. Tuesday night, he did very well with it. I mean, he's sort of come into his own with that form. And he likes to give that sort of CEO style, you know, tick off the things that I want to do kind of speech. And so I thought he did very well. I thought a lot of things he said should get very broad support. They were things that it's hard to argue with. I think he's focusing on, you know, this idea that we can do better by people in the middle and people on the lower end of the economic scale. So, you know, I would give him high marks.
Well, you know, it wasn't there wasn't a whole lot of giveaways in the speech. He didn't make a whole lot of promises. It was pretty realistic. These are things we can get past and we should do to make government more efficient and make service delivery more effective to the customers. And, you know, I think that's just good, solid leadership. That's good, solid governing. He didn't go all pie in the sky and say we're going to, you know, do this great, big, expensive thing and that he knows we don't have money for.
Do you think people appreciate that, Stephen?
I think they do, but I also think that a lot of people are scratching their heads a little bit because it was such a sort of technical speech. They're not sure what all of the sort of personal ramifications of this thing, of these ideas mean. For instance, he said we have 140 programs in social and human services and we need fewer. Well, what is that? What are the programs that he's talking about, and which ones does he think we can get rid of?
And if you're a state employee, you're also thinking, all right, how does this impact where I am too?
And it sounded almost like this sort of a concierge service for delivering, you know, social benefits. You got a one-stop shop where you go in and say, this is what I need, and they take something from here and something from there and something from over. You know, if it works, if you can get it, you know, through, it might make the bureaucracy a lot more manageable for people, and it might actually turn these programs into what they're supposed to be, and that is temporary assistance to get people to the next stage of their lives.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail on that. So let's go bullet point by bullet point. One of the biggest items on the governor's agenda is getting a yes vote to raise the sales tax in order to get $1.2 billion to fix Michigan's roads. Take a listen.
I want to recognize great bipartisan work done at the end of last year. And it was about doing a bipartisan solution to deal with something we knew we had to do, and that's a transportation proposal to deal with the fact that we have rotten roads and bridges in our state. No one in Michigan likes our roads and bridges. We got that work done, but our work isn't done. Now we need to ask our citizens to support that effort in May on the ballot.
All right, no one likes Michigan's roads and bridges. Nolan, you're shaking your head. It feels like that there is not a lot of support for this ballot initiative in May.
I'm not sure whether there will be a lot of support in May or not. There's not today because of the very reason you said. Nobody likes the roads and everybody wants the roads fixed. But he knows, and he knows as well as anybody that he's selling a really lousy package here. This is not what he wanted. This is not what the legislative leadership wanted. This is what a cowardly legislature ended up passing at the end of the year. This sales tax, raising the sales tax, a hard deal anyway, because it's the most visible tax and it's the most regressive tax. People pay it on everything. They see it on every receipt they get. It raises about $600 million more than what was on the table when they were talking about raising the fuel tax, and that money goes everywhere. So it's a Christmas tree bill, and I think there's going to be some pushback on that. A lot of the business groups aren't sure whether they want to support it. I don't know that this was, I know this wasn't the right way to do it, and I don't know that he's got the right message simply saying our roads are bad, you got to pass a higher tax to fix them.
Okay, so Nolan says this is lousy policy. Is this the best policy that we're going to find on this?
Well, I think that's the question. It is bad. It's poor tax policy, and that's the thing that I think has got to really rankle the governor, who has been really focused in his first 4 years on trying to iron out tax policy at the state level, and this would be going backwards, sort of more regressive, and funding roads with something other than user fees. So, there's a lot of problems with it. The question is, can you get something better out of a legislature that was dysfunctional enough to end us up in this place in the first instance? And I don't know what the calculus there is. If you turn this down, do you hope that they would, this summer, when they're gone, normally anyway, would they stay and try to get something else done? The fall is not a great prospect for another package. So this may be the best we could do, which I think is a really sad commentary on the state of legislative politics in the state. But that may be where we end up.
So there truly is no plan B, Nolan, and you have a lot of new faces in the legislature. You're not quite sure what kind of deal you could get from that.
No, there's not a plan B, but you could have private groups do a citizens initiative and get the right policy together for the November ballot.
Well, you'd have to start
or
that
the November
now.
16 ballot,
Yeah,
or
16 would be the
it would be
earliest.
the earliest you could do it. But it might be better to just suck it up and wait and do it right, rather than be stuck forever with this really poor proposal, this really expensive, ineffective proposal. And you've got people out there the governor is trying to convince them, vote for this because your roads are bad. People know the roads are bad, but they also think there's money in the state government to fix it, that the state government's spending too much money on other things. I don't believe there's money there for it, but that's a prevailing attitude. People don't believe we're fixing the roads right when we do fix them, so they don't want their money squandered away. They believe truck weights are too high. There's a lot of messages that he's got to deliver that he's not delivering yet.
Is there a bad timing issue in this, though? If we look at waiting until the 2016 ballot, you've lost, or we've lost so much time in terms of fixing things.
Yeah, I have asked the governor a couple of times whether there's anything that he has at his discretion, his executive discretion, to be able to move money, more money into the road fund from other places. He hadn't really answered that question. I don't think, even if he could say yes, then the question would be, well, where are you taking that money from?
Right.
Who else is going without, so that we can fund roads? And that's what we were trying to avoid doing anymore. That's how we've been dealing with it.
The beauty of the fuel tax, of raising the fuel taxes, with gas at $1.75 at some stations, you could go 15 cents with people not really You know, it would take you back to where you were a few weeks ago in terms of the cost of gasoline. But the beauty of the fuel tax is, by Constitution, every dime of it has to go to roads. And this would be, if this proposal passes, it'll mark the first time we've ever funded roads with something other than a user fee or user tax.
Real quick before we leave this topic, Stephen, so what could the governor do to convince a lot of these business leaders and county executives and other groups to get on board with this in the next couple of months?
I think the only hammer he has is the prospect of this not getting fixed for a really long time. In other words, that if you don't support this, we're looking at 2 construction seasons perhaps going by before we start really repairing roads that are absolutely crumbling, and you know that the business community has an interest in that. You know, chasing people away because the roads are bad. So it really is. That's the choice we're making: is fix it now with a you know, mediocre plan at best, or wait a much longer time.
This was a very
hastily
written proposal, and it's got a lot of unintended consequences in it, uncertainties in it. This is it's you know, trying to write a tax bill in a matter of a few hours is what they did in December. It's just the wrong way to do things, and it's going to lead to, like Obamacare, a lot of things in there that people didn't realize were in there that's going to come back and bite them later on.
All right, well, turning to one of the biggest phrases from the governor's speech, expanding the river of opportunity. Snyder is going to merge the state's 2 social service agencies and possibly realign or eliminate other programs. He wants the state to become more people-centered instead of program-centered.
The next step is I'm working on an executive order that I will issue to take the Department of Community Health and the Department of Human Services and merge them into one department to focus on health and human services with supporting agencies. So we can be much more one-stop shopping, really human-focused, people-focused on how to deliver great services to our citizens there.
That seems to make a lot of sense, Nolan. What has been the reaction now in the last couple of days? Is it more of like, okay, now how do you actually do this?
Well, yeah, and I think it's a very positive thing to streamline government. And if that's what he spends his next 4 years doing, working on the bureaucracy, working on the structure of government, making it more efficient, making it less costly, I think he'll have accomplished a very important thing. But it's not the sort of thing that gets people all, you know, geeked up about. I mean, it's you know, it's sort of inside baseball how many departments you have and how they're run. I think what people want to know is, will the delivery of services become more efficient? And you know, we'll see how he structures it.
And is this a roadmap, do you think, for more efficiency, Stephen?
Maybe. I mean, you know, efficiency is a fine goal, and that makes some sense in certain places to try to make that happen. The bigger issue here is the service delivery. These are the most vulnerable citizens in the state who rely on these agencies for things that they absolutely have got to have. And I think if anybody is worried, it's that this idea of efficiency will cut back on the services that are available or eliminate things that people actually need. And I think you have to guard against that. You know, this is a governor who doesn't have a great record on dealing with people at the lower end of the economic scale, getting rid of the earned income tax credit, for instance, which he really pushed hard on, suggested that he didn't understand the kind of things that poor people need. Now, maybe he's pivoting and trying to go in a different direction here, but I think it's got to be watched really carefully to make sure this is just not an effort to say, well, we're going to give these people less than what they have now.
What poor people need is a job, and if the employment numbers out this week, best in hit the lowest number in Michigan in years. If he focused on nothing more than that, on creating jobs, I think poor people, middle-class people, everybody would be a lot better off.
But the EITC fight was instructive here. Mm-hmm. This is for working people. This is for the working poor. The problem with poverty right now is that there are a lot of people who work full-time who don't make enough to live or to move ahead. The EITC was a vehicle for that, and he didn't get that. I mean, he really did not understand. We had that argument many times in that first 2 years. He just didn't. He couldn't relate, and so I think the fear here is that that same kind of dynamic could play out in another very important area of government.
He's also talking about closing the skills gap and a lot of job training programs, and you know, you hear about this kind of restructuring, and all of this could take a large amount of funding, and you look at people and say, now we've got a budget shortfall going into 2015 here. Where do you start allocating some of that money, Nolan?
Well, you take a look at programs that aren't working and you defund those and fund the ones that you think might work. I mean, one of the problems with job training programs, federal level, state level, is that they haven't actually trained that many people for jobs. I mean, you've got a lot of programs, you're not producing a whole lot of job-ready workers, or at least workers who find jobs. I think that the current program they've got, where companies are contracting with community colleges to train workers for actual jobs these companies have, is the best approach to it. Make sure there's a job at the end of the training program. It provides more of an incentive for people to go through and complete the program.
You've got a lot of nonprofits who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this as well, Stephen.
Yeah, well, and we've got good models around the state already of people who have figured out how to train people for better jobs and higher skilled work. The governor can look at those and expand them or duplicate them.
Okay, all right. You know, education was a key item in the governor's speech as well, specifically talking about third grade literacy and getting funding for early childhood programs that set kids up for success.
We need to put a much stronger focus on what I describe as prenatal through third grade. P3. One of the important metrics in someone's life of the river of opportunity is the ability to be proficient reading by third grade. How have we done? We were at 63% in 2010, we're at 70% today, about a 10% improvement. We can't be proud of that, folks. 70% doesn't cut it.
All right, talking a lot about literacy in third grade, also putting a lot of resources prenatal through third grade in those key areas, Nolan.
That's a good idea. I mean, you want to deal with the problem as early as you can and get kids caught up as quickly as you can, because it's a lot harder to catch up in 6th grade or 9th grade, and impossible after that. There's a little bit of a fight in the legislature, and we'll see how that works out, about how to enforce this. So, there are a lot of states that won't pass a kid until they reach 3rd grade. So there's holding back, and these kids don't get to move from 3rd grade to 4th grade, and there's a lot of debate on whether that does more harm than good.
What didn't we hear come from the governor when it came to education at this State of the State, Stephen?
Well, I mean, I still believe that we've got to have a bigger conversation about funding, the way we fund education. There's school districts all over the state that the current funding formula does not really work for anymore. Urban districts in particular are going to need something different. We also didn't hear that much about Detroit, and I think that may be because he's just not ready to come up with what the solution is yet. But I think there was some anticipation that we might hear more about where he's headed or what he's thinking about the future there. I think that also could be a model for what you do in some of these other urban districts that are headed the same place that Detroit is now. But he didn't, he sort of drive-by talked about Detroit in that speech.
Yeah, he talked about all kids should be achieving, and we want more for our kids. It was a little vague, Nolan. I was expecting a little bit more.
I don't think he knows what he's going to do in Detroit, and I don't think anybody knows what you can do in that district. The emergency management has not erased the deficit. It's cut it, but it's not erased it. Academic performance has improved somewhat, and enrollment has stabilized a bit, but still nowhere near where it should be. And so his choice was to reappoint an emergency manager, appoint a new emergency manager, return it back to the school board. And I don't think anybody wants that school board to take over again. So what's the governing model look like? You can't keep it under emergency manager forever.
All right, let's do what's the big takeaway from the State of the State? So now we've heard what the governor would like to do over this next year or so. How does that line up with what this new legislature perhaps wants to do, Stephen?
Well, I think that's the big question. You've got a legislature that's talking about all kinds of different things that they want to do, mostly in the sort of imagined moral crisis area of government that we see coming from the very far right. I mean, the Tea Party response to the governor's speech was just one of the most outlandish and bizarre rants I'd seen in a long time. These are the folks who have a lot of control in that legislature, and are they going to focus on what they want to do, or are they going to do what he wants to do? He, I think, laid out a very clear agenda that they should be behind anyway. but they may give him some trouble.
What do you think, Nolan?
Well, the new leadership in the House and the Senate seem to be reasonable. I mean, they're working with the governor on this roads deal where I would have anticipated they would have said, oh, no, it's a tax hike, we're not going to get behind it. So, a lot depends on the quality of the leaders. They can keep a lot of stuff tamped down, not let it get out and become a distraction. So if he develops a good relationship with legislative leaders, I think it'll be okay.
All right, so when do we get the budget? February 10th, somewhere
month,
around
right?
there?
A couple of weeks.
Okay, so we'll be able to see where we go from there. All right, turning to Washington and fallout from the State of the Union address this week. The president made a push for income equality by raising taxes for America's rich and redistributing to the middle class in the form of tax credits. His agenda and that of the Republican Congress are not the same, and it leaves Americans to wonder what truly will get accomplished. And so we've had a couple of days to digest everything. So I'm going to start with you, Stephen. Is there any kind of program or idea that there is agreement between this Congress and
I'm
the
not sure if there's agreement, but there's certainly some common space they can all occupy. You talk about expanding family leave, which was one of the president's ideas. That's worked in some states already. It certainly works in every other industrialized country on the planet that does it. That's a place that Republicans should be supporting the president. Immigration is a place where I think they can come together. We're not that far apart substantively. It's a political problem because the House for 2 years said they wouldn't even take up the bill that the Senate had passed that had all the things in it that Republicans say they want. Everyone's going to focus on the tax issue and try to make it about this sort of class warfare issue about, should the rich subsidize the poor or the middle class? And I think that's an argument we have to have. I think, there's absolutely time to revisit how we do that in this country. But I think you don't have to have that fight and let it distract from all these other things that are possible.
Do you agree that there are some common ground there, Nolan?
I didn't see it in this speech, and I think it's time we stop talking about what they do in the rest of the industrialized world. Europe's collapsing under the weight of state.
It's not under family leave.
It's all of this combined, all of this social welfare state that is collapsing the European economy. And what we saw in the president's speech the other night was much more of it. More expansion of government, more giveaways, more entitlements, increasing the number of people who are dependent on government even further. We've had 6 years now, 20 new tax hikes on the wealthy, and yet he's still out there saying soak the rich. What's happened during all those wealth transfer schemes? The poor and the middle class are poor, and the rich are wealthier because government
suggests
policies,
that maybe taxes aren't the issue.
What it suggests is that the government is getting in the way of the progress of the middle class and the poor through taxes and regulations that keep down employment. We've had slow employment growth. That's what's leading to stagnant wages.
We actually haven't. It's not the problem we have is actually more related to incomes than it is to employment.
And incomes go up when there's a demand for workers.
When there's demand and when there's growth. I mean, there's no question that this idea that that accelerated wealth of the kind that we have is just okay. It's got to be revisited. The wealth gap at this point is greater than it has been at any time since right before the crash in 1929. That has to do somewhat with tax policy. It
has to do mostly with monetary policy.
Some of it too.
That is propping up a stock market. The real estate boom recovery has particularly helped the wealthy. But you have, everybody said you raise the minimum wage, you're going to have fewer low-income people working, fewer entry-level jobs. We have that today. And everybody can't make the connection between policy and slow job growth.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, because people hear this and at odds on either side of the aisle here, and they think, gosh, we're going to have gridlock now for the next 2 years.
That's what this speech was designed to create.
Actually, you say, of course we will, but people are fed up with it.
Well, he could have found 4 or 5 things to put on the table and say, we can work together on this. Instead, he put 4 or 5 things on there designed to maneuver Republicans into a difficult position going into the next election.
Okay, but
is that politics?
Okay, but we're in year 7 of this presidency, right?
Campaign.
And we were in year 7 of this presidency. He waited for a long time for Republicans to come around on things that they said they wanted to do. Immigration is exhibit A of the way that the Republicans have led since this guy has been president. They said what they wanted. They said, you stay out of it and we'll get it done. The Senate gets it done, and then the House says, we won't even take it up, and they wait for 2 years.
All right, we've got 20 seconds left. Just going to have to be the last word,
Nolan. A new Congress coming in, instead of waiting to see what he could get done with these new leadership.
What happened over the last 6 years shouldn't have mattered, and he should have just waited.
So see what he could have done.
That's absurd.
Never gave them a chance to do anything.
All right, so we'll see.
Years.
We'll see if we can find some kind of common ground. Thanks, guys. That's going to do it for My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. We're at myweek.org for any shows you might have missed, just when it was getting good, right? Find us on Facebook and Twitter. For all of us at Detroit Public TV, I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next week for My Week. Take care.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta,